But I am the president of an organization called Justice and Mercy. We're based out of Lancaster, PA. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. To sum us up in one line, we would be an organization that's devoted to second chances for a group of individuals that, on a whole, society has decided they might not be worth it. Before I really get started, I just want to do a quick, hands up survey so I can know my audience. How many here are attorneys, practicing attorneys? How many are part of another organization like I am? And students? Got it. Thanks. And other, yes.
I don't really practice. I do APRNA, so I do alternative.
Got it. Great. Thank you. The title of my presentation is Seeking Peace Through Second Chances. And I'll give my presentation and then hopefully there'll be some time for questions and answers at the end because you might have some after I'm done my presentation. I want to start off by telling the story of one of our clients named David. David is a really good kid. That's who he is. He's in his early 20s, and he's a great kid. He was raised in York, Pennsylvania. He was raised in the church. His parents were missionaries, and he went to school and he did extracurricular activities, and he was a really good kid, had great parents, had a great support network. And unfortunately, somewhere along the line, at a pretty early age, in his early teens, David got involved in drugs. And early on, he got involved in some pretty hardcore drugs. He was doing heroin in his teenage years, and as oftentimes happens when you are involved in drugs, he became involved in some petty crime as well. And as oftentimes happens when you get involved in petty crime, you get in trouble with the law and you go to prison, and that's what happened to David when he was about 19. He ended up in prison. David was released early last year, and he had hit rock bottom in prison. He was a young man, and he realized who was surrounding him in the prison setting, what their lives had looked like. Some of them had been to prison and out, and back to prison, and out, and back to prison, and he kind of hit rock bottom and did not want that for his own life. So he got out. He was committed to making a change. He did 90 drug treatment, 90 times in 90 days. He was sober by the time we met him for over 180 days. And he was desperately looking for a job while he was doing these other things. He couldn't find one for a long time. He eventually went back to his home church in York, got involved there, and was still looking for a job, just could not find one. And finally, he found one in early October, and he started working and was able to make 2 paychecks, and each paycheck he got, he made payments on his fines and costs. Fines and costs are something when you are in trouble with the law, you go to prison, you come out, and then part of your parole, which he was on, was to pay off these fines and costs. But he hadn't been making payments when he didn't have a job. And so after 2 paychecks working, David was arrested at a visit to his parole officer because for a couple of technical parole violations, not new crimes. This was not drug use, it was not theft or any kind of new crime. They were technical violations. The biggest one was he did not pay on his fines and costs when he didn't have a job. And so they put him back in prison. And the people he had been meeting with at his church, they were so frustrated because he was doing all the right things, and they put him back into prison for such a silly thing. And so they called us. We have an in-house attorney and a program called Alternative Sentencing, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But we got involved in David's case. We got to work, and I'll finish that story up at the end. So why should we care? Is there really a problem? Are we systematically withholding grace and second chances from people in the criminal justice system? One of the answers to why we should care about people who are in prison and in the criminal justice system is, and this is the biggest answer to me, it's one of the biggest reasons why Justice and Mercy does what we do. We're a Christian group, and it's found in Matthew 25, starting in verse 34. And you can just bear with me while I read it because it's pretty powerful. It said, "The king will say to those Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. In other translations, it's just says that he's talking to the righteous people at this point, when he comes again. He says, I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick, you looked after me. And I was in prison and you came to visit me. And the righteous, they'll answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you? Or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in? Or need clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? And the king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you do for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you do for me. So at Justice and Mercy, we take that literally. However society and we as part of society treat those who are in trouble and those who are in prison is exactly like we would treat Jesus himself. But unfortunately, even for Christians, that verse, knowing that verse, that's a pretty common verse, the least of these. That's not enough. We still have a system where we are systematically withholding grace and second chances from people, and Christians are a big part of that system. We live in this society, and evangelicals are 40% of the population, and so that verse is somehow not enough, and so there needs to be some other reasons, apparently. 15 years ago, when we founded Justice and Mercy, I was not involved, but when the founder started, he started that because he learned a few practical reasons why we should care and that there is a problem. 15 years ago, our founder in Lancaster, he's a Mennonite businessman, and his bishop told him, you need to go into the prisons with a guy named John Rush, a chaplain out of Reading, and you need to visit people in prison, you need to visit wardens, and you need to go to Harrisburg and visit legislators and visit with the DOC and find out that there's a problem and help these people and love these people. And Tom, our founder, said, no way, because these people committed crime and they deserve to be in prison, they deserve to be there as long as we can put them in there, lock them up, throw away the key. We hear that a lot. And he was a great Christian man his whole life. He raised a Christian family, but that was his thought process. But they kept on hounding him, and he agreed. Finally, he said, I'll give you every Tuesday for 6 months. I'll do these trips with you, prisons, wardens, DOC, Harrisburg. And he said, at the end of 6 months, I will have convinced John Rush that there is no problem and that he should get a real job, and I'll help him find one. And so he started doing that, and he found some really interesting things out after those 6 months, and eventually started Justice and Mercy. Some of these things he found out are that the United States has 5% of the world's population and 25% of its prisoners. So 1 in 4 people in the entire world who are in prison in America. In Pennsylvania, 1 in 28 people, 1 in 28 are under correctional control of some kind, probation, parole, in the court system or in prison. 1 in 28. In 1980, Pennsylvania had 8 prisons and 8,000 prison inmates, and a slew of other treatment programs like mental health care, state institutions. Today, our population in Pennsylvania has gone up 7%, but we have 26 state prisons and over 51,000 state prison inmates. And that doesn't count over 43 county prison facilities with over 35,000 county prisoners. And that's just in 30 or so years. At $100 per day on average for the state inmate. That is $1.9 billion in the Department of Corrections budget every year just in the state of Pennsylvania alone. And we have a 70% recidivism rate. That's what Tom found out. So 7 in 10 people who leave the state prison, where we're supposed to be restoring people and rehabilitating them and correcting them, come back within 3 years. 70% recidivism rate. We are failing 7 out of 10 people. Like in any law school class, any test, if you failed, got 7 out of 10 questions wrong, you would fail. But that system it just continues to operate how it operates. We have an epidemic of warehousing people and not giving them a second chance. That's what the bottom line is. So the founder of Justice Mercy, he started asking why this was happening. Why are we putting more and more people into prison for less and less offenses? Why are people coming out of prison and we're violating them like David for technical reasons or for new crimes that they could really see treatment for instead of see the inside of a prison cell? And so he was meeting with DAs, he was meeting with wardens, he was meeting with people within the system. And one of the biggest comments that he would get was, and we still get this all the time, is this is how the good people want it. And many times by the good people, I've heard that, a direct quote from the DA in Lancaster, this is what the good people wanted, it's not my fault. And by the good people, especially in Lancaster, a very Christian area, those good people are the Christian voters. The people who vote in, the hardline people who don't talk about second chances because they're hard on crime. So Tom knew that something needed to change, so he started Justice and Mercy. And we have 4 basic departments. We call it the 4 pillars of justice and mercy, and it's how we address these issues. The first one is legislative reform, and that's what Ted was talking about a little bit. That's what we started off doing. That was our bread and butter 15 years ago, because Tom, as a businessman, he was also involved in politics, and he had a pretty good network, and so he started to use that network instead of furthering his business and that type of thing, which is what he developed it for, to try to make these changes. So we do events like this where we just talk to people. We do forums. We have one in Lebanon County on April 30th where we get a few hundred people out and we do a forum, and we have some senators and people like that there, and we talk about these issues and what we can do about them. And we specifically try to change the laws in Pennsylvania that have led to this system. Some of those things are mandatory minimum prison sentences. In Pennsylvania, there's a prescribed mandatory sentence for every crime. The only person who can determine if that is appropriate or not is really the DA. So we have an adversarial system. That's how it's supposed to work. 2 equal sides who go against each other, and an unbiased judge who decides the outcome, or a jury. In the criminal justice system, we don't really have that, because the DA has the power, the only person who has the power to waive a mandatory minimum sentence. Not even the judge, unless that judge is really, really courageous. So things like that need to change. Right now, we're pushing for expungement reform. In Pennsylvania, you have only a couple ways to expunge your criminal record if you get one. You can turn 70 years old, and then your record may be expunged. Or you may die, and if you die, your relatives can expunge your record for you so that your tombstone can say clean record. Those are the only ways you expunge your record, unless you get a summary offense, which are things like parking tickets and unpaid parking tickets and things like that. So right now there are bills in Harrisburg, House Bill 908 and 909 to be exact, which Justice Mercy helped to write with the legislative support that we've built over the 15 years, and a weak version of them have already passed the Senate, and we are working on a strong version in the House to try to get a compromise bill. But what our bill would do would create a system where after 7 years of not reoffending, once you're released from prison, your record would be expunged if it is not a sexual crime or a violent crime in nature. So that's a huge step in the right direction. We have so many instances of people who are systematically withheld a second chance, even after they're supposedly go through our system and are corrected. They don't get a true second chance. The ideal of our justice system that says, once you do your time, you have a new start, that isn't realized with a criminal record. We had a woman who contacted Justice and Mercy. She was in her 60s. She was a grandmother. She was retired. Her daughter had cancer. Her daughter was a single mom, had kids, lived in an apartment complex. The grandma wanted to move to that apartment complex and take care of her grandkids while her daughter did cancer treatment. And the landlord told her, "We don't want people like you living here." And by people like you, he meant someone with a criminal record because 28 years ago, that woman was arrested on a felony for writing bad checks and had never reoffended since. But when that landlord looks up a criminal record, he just sees a criminal record. So people like that need a fresh start, obviously. So that's the kind of thing we do with our legislative reform. We think that Christians need to be involved in the legislative process in different ways than they are now to try to create second chances and to try to create a system that cares about the least of these. Our second department and pillar is case management. We have, because we're an advocacy group and a group that talks about how we care about people in prison, we have hundreds of people who write to us and their families call us, and they have various issues inside and outside of the prison. And we have social workers on staff who manage those people's cases and help them get things like jobs and home plans and books in prison, every type of issue that you can imagine. It's not, most people, there aren't too many organizations doing that. The third department is our mentor program. We recruit and train Christians to go through our training program and become mentors for people like David, who we end up representing in court, or someone who's coming out of prison and wants to make a second chance, or wants to have a second chance and make a change. We pair them up with a mentor with similar interests and that type of thing that has been trained through our curriculum, and they are a friend and a support for that person for 18 months, and it has been wildly successful. Our mentor program has about a 7% recidivism rate. We also then do alternative sentencing. We have on-staff attorneys who are full-time employed by Justice and Mercy, and they represent a certain type of criminal offender, someone who would normally have a public defender, or someone who is right above that cutoff for a public defender. In Lancaster, that income cutoff, unless you can kind of rearrange your income, is $8,000. So in Lancaster, if you make $8,000 or more a year, you are considered too wealthy for a public defender. And so you don't get one. And so there is definitely an in-between of people who don't get a public defender. They might get a court-appointed attorney, but they don't get a public defender, and they can't afford some of the larger firms that we have in Lancaster. So we represent those people, and we give them the kind of defense that they might not normally get at a public defender's office. Not because a public defender is, if any of you guys are public defenders, I would never want your job. And I admire you for doing it, but you are certainly overworked, certainly underpaid, and so we represent someone and we build a character profile for them. We show the court that this isn't just a rap sheet. It's not, this person is not just their criminal record score. They aren't just a mandatory minimum sentence. They're not a number. That's what our criminal justice system, that's what defendants now are to our system. We actually have something called the criminal record score, which is a number assigned to every single defendant who and it just determines what mandatory sentence they fall under. And so we try to change that. We try to show the court who this person is, what the root cause of their crime is. Every single one of our clients gets a free mental health evaluation from an organization called Naaman Center, which would normally cost a public offender several $1,000s, so it doesn't usually happen. So we establish what the root cause of their crime is, and then what sort of alternative to prison could help them address that root cause and really get a second chance. And we've been really successful with that. I don't think we've ever had a client who's gotten the mandatory minimum. Sometimes they do go to prison, but it's always for shorter than they would have. And it's always coupled with something like drug treatment, our mentor program, and things like that. So we need to start thinking of community safety in terms of these second chances and these alternatives. Right now, we think of community safety as the people who commit crimes against our community go to prison. We no longer see them. They no longer have the opportunity to commit those crimes. Instead, we need to start thinking of community safety as 7 out of 10 of those people are going to come back into the community. And right now, we're failing to the degree that 7 out of 10 will reoffend and be back. So that's not community safety. We need to figure out a way to systematically provide second chances to those individuals so they're not coming back and reoffending. That's how we need to start looking at community safety and second chances. Instead of how do we, warehouse the bad people, how do we restore them and rehabilitate them? So to get back to David's case, our attorney got started on David's case and built a profile of who this person was for the DA, for the court, and what the root cause of this person's crime was, and we represented him like we represent anybody else. And on the day of the court case, luckily it was a judge who was good friends with a judge who was on our board at one time. So we have some connections with judges in York and Lancaster in that area, and we presented our case, and the DA and the probation officer was unwilling to go back on the recommendation of 6 months to a year more prison for David for not paying fines and costs when he did not have a job. And so instead, the judge said, we had gotten David 3 people who trained him to become his mentor. We really had a great alternative sentence for David. And the judge said to David, look behind you at Justice and Mercy, at this church, at these people who are now involved in your life. He said, the defendants in my courtroom don't have anybody behind them. This is really unusual. So he said, I'm going to release you basically into their custody today. I'm going to reject the 6 months to a year sentence, and I'm giving you time served, because he sat in jail for 45 days, waiting, and lost his job that he had gotten, and sat in jail 45 days before his hearing, which was rescheduled on the request of the probation officer against our objection. And he said, take advantage of this second chance. And today, David is someone who is on promo videos that we do. He is someone who is working 2 jobs right now, actually. He is doing something called Celebrate Recovery at that church, and he is going through his mentor relationships, and he's a crazy success story. He's been sober since the day he got out of prison. Part of his alternative was drug testing, so as part of his probation. So that's the kind of second chance and restoration that we can give people if we decide that they are worth it. So that is my presentation about Justice Mercy, about what we do. And I hope that you guys have questions, because I love answering questions. Yes?
One is, I know Delaware County has a program where if you have like a DUI, you can go through an accelerated program,
Yeah.
and then after 10 years, you do get it expunged.
Yes.
You do have, and they
Well,
make
it actually gets expunged when you finish the program, so.
Okay.
That is an ARD,
Okay.
right?
Yeah, but
And
it's a good program, because they have you go through all kinds of counseling. I mean, it is, I don't know, I think Chester may have it too. I don't know if y'all have it out.
Lancaster does have ARD. We just started a drug court, which also has some similar things.
Mhm.
That it is basically not ever getting a criminal record, kind of. ARD is, if you go through this program, you don't get a criminal record. It's kind of, it just disappears. So it is a great program. It's in Lancaster, I think there's only 1 or 2 judges involved in the ARD program, and it's only for first offenders. And it's only for certain types of offenders, and not even all of those people in Lancaster get into the system just because of space availability, unfortunately. But that is something that we advocated for in Lancaster. I'm from Delaware County, and now I live in Montgomery County.
Because it's really good, because they make you do social service. They make
Absolutely.
They do charge you, so
Yes.
that's kind of a penalty to it, because you have to come up, and you have to be working to try to come up with the money to pay for it.
And that's a big part of, we always want our offenders to take responsibility for what they've done.
So
So.
I think that other thing is the restorative justice. Now, I'm just trying to understand that better, that
Yeah.
concept better, because I'm a Christian conciliator, okay, but that seems like we've been doing a lot with juveniles.
Yes.
And I'm not sure how the process works.
Yeah.
But it's something that I've been interested in learning more about, just because I think it sounds like that might be, and again, I think Delaware County has a pretty strong restorative justice system. I don't know what some of the other counties have. But
Right.
That is something that,
Lancaster doesn't have much of a restorative justice initiative, but we do through our alternative sentence program when we represent offenders. What we do is, and the counties who do, I think you're right that a lot of it is juvenile focused. We partner with another nonprofit, something that's not a government program, called, it used to be called LaVorp in Lancaster, you might have heard of it, and now it's called Center for Community Peacemaking, a much better name if you ask me. And I'm not sure what LaVorp stand for, Lancaster something, I assume, but they do peacemaking, as their name implies. And so we actually sometimes have the opportunity when there's a victim in our crime, a lot of times it's theft victim, and a lot of times that's a family member, a neighbor, or something like that, but we've had the opportunity to go through their program with the offender and the victim before court ever happens for the offender. And so we have actually had, believe it or not, victims in court who have gone through this reconciliation process through CCP, who have advocated for the alternative that we are asking for the offender who stole from them or something along those lines, which at that point, restorative justice is so powerful that at that point, the DA would be a monster if he would reject the victim, especially if it's an unrelated party who's asking for this alternative. So when we're able to do that, we always get the alternative, which is great. So yes.
Actually, I have a couple of things I wanted to ask.
Sure.
Something that the young lady mentioned about juveniles, how does their situation actually play into?
What we do?
Yes, and there's two other things. The other one, we throw this one out, is restoring voting rights.
Yes.
And the third one is, do you work with fugitive safe surrender laws?
Fugitive safe surrender, people turning themselves in, is that a specific organization that you're talking about, or is that just a concept that you're saying?
It's with the U.S. Marshals.
Yeah. So as far as case management goes, we oftentimes have people, and it's usually out of state, and we're a Pennsylvania organization, but we do have people who contact us because they've committed a crime and they're on the lam and they don't know where to go, and they contact us. It's always really interesting because, Justice and Mercy works within the system, so we can't be too, I guess, subversive about what we do. So, because we have to have relationships with DAs and judges to be able to do what we do. So we basically, always recommend that they get an attorney before they turn themselves in, and that the attorney helps them through that process. Our attorney has done that for clients in Lancaster. There was a guy last year who stole cars for his drug habit, which is 75% of crime is drug related. So he stole some cars and then called us and said, I'm in northern Lancaster County in a barn, I don't know what to do. So it was really interesting, and we picked him up and brought him to our office and got the whole statement and everything, and then we just took him to the police department. And it actually worked out really well. That was one of the things that was one of the instances that we used CCP, and that was a huge success story as well. He's in drug treatment program right now. So we encounter that a lot. Juveniles, I will say Justice and Mercy doesn't work much with juveniles. I don't know why, other than it's just not a big part of our clientele who hears about us, I guess. What was the second one? Voting rights. Yeah, so there are some states where your voting rights are restored, and some where they are not. And so like anything, it varies state by state, which is kind of unequitable to begin with. So we advocate that people with a record are able to vote once they've done their time. That's one way that we punish people for the rest of their life.